There are some interesting things going on with our brain. Sensory information coming in on the left side of the body ends up on the opposite side of the brain. It crosses over that corpus callosum. Motor commands from one side of the brain go to the opposite side of the body. And this occurs in the brainstem and the spinal cord as well. Both hemispheres are similar, but there are some differences. What landmark separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe of each cerebral hemisphere? It's an important one. That is the central sulcus. And the fissure, actually here, I don't think we've mentioned it before, but the fissure separates the left and right cerebral hemispheres. Which of the following cannot be seen in a mid-sagittal section of the brain? The lateral ventricles. So we saw those special stripes, the primary motor cortex and the primary sensory cortex, but there are also what are called association areas. So the association area interprets incoming data and coordinates the muscle response. So I would just understand that there are association areas with each of the senses, of the sensory areas. There's just, see this, there's just way too much information. You can't possibly remember all this stuff. So all the information's coming up the spinal cord, up through the brainstem, hits the thalamus, and is relayed to the correct part of the brain. Might go to the visual area. That's actually in our occipital lobe. The gustatory, which is taste, the smell area, the hearing area, and so on. So we know where all these areas are, although it's not really a definite boundary from one area to the next. You do not need to know any of these areas. Again, just read through a little bit too much information to know. One thing that's kind of important here, the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is the area that predicts consequences of an action, and it takes years for us to develop that. This is why teenagers often act without being able to understand the consequences of those actions. Their prefrontal cortex is not developed yet. But this is also where there's damage when you're schizophrenic. You've got damage to that prefrontal cortex. In general, the left is speech center, language skills, analytical tasks, and the right side is for 3D relationships, interpreting sensory information, identification by touch, smell, and sight. So this is showing that information coming in your left eye crosses over and is analyzed in the right side. You can see all the things that are controlled in the right side of the brain versus the left side of the brain. About 9% of humans are left-handed, and there's a very high percentage of artists and musicians that are left-handed. The diencephalon is that portion of the brain that is just superior to the brainstem. And it consists of the thalamus and hypothalamus. And just in that area, sort of posterior to it is a gland, a very round gland called the pineal gland. The pineal gland produces melatonin, and melatonin helps us regulate our day-night cycles. The thalamus is the relay station. It's just going to send incoming sensory information to the correct part of the brain for analysis. The hypothalamus, you can't possibly learn all of the different functions of the hypothalamus, but it is incredible. All of these different things that are controlled by the hypothalamus. So I just say homeostasis, but we'll look at these just quickly. The subconscious centers involved with rage, pleasure, pain, sexual arousal as part of the limbic system. Now, alligators have a very large limbic system, and I wonder which of these four it focuses on. My guess with alligators maybe is rage. I don't know. Adjusts the autonomic centers in the brainstem, coordinates the nervous and endocrine system, secretes certain hormones, provides us with sensations of hunger and thirst, coordinates voluntary and involuntary functions, regulates our body temperature, and so on. So here we are coming up the spinal cord. This little pillow shape here is the pons. So medulla oblongata, pons, midbrain, and then the diencephalon of the thalamus and hypothalamus. Here's the pineal gland, and here is the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is connected to the hypothalamus. We can skip all this on the midbrain. We'll skip a little bit of skipping here. Skip. Cerebellum, it's kind of cool because they've always said that it adjusts our postural muscles to maintain balance, fine-tunes movements, but just in the last 6 months they've discovered that it also is responsible for a lot of thinking. So we still don't know everything about the brain. The reticular activating system is important when you study, actually. When you study, you want to have a focus on the work that on what you're studying. That kind of focus where everything else is drowned out. You don't hear anything else. You're not aware of dings and you're not aware of sirens. And this is our reticular activating system. If you're in a coma, it's a problem with your reticular activating system, and it is this system that allows us to wake up in the morning. What is the function of the reticular formation of the midbrain? It stimulates the cerebral cortex to stay awake. And EEC is a way we can measure the brain waves, the electrical activity of the brain waves. Did I say EEC or EEG? Anyway, it shows abnormal brain activity, so you can see seizures, but also we have different brain waves if we're resting versus thinking hard versus sleeping. Well, here are some of these brain waves. Alpha, beta, theta, and delta. And the alpha waves are found in a resting adult. You're just sitting there quietly, your eyes closed. The beta waves are when you're under stress, maybe when you're in class and paying close attention and under stress in class. The theta waves are seen when during frustration. And the delta waves are seen in sleep, but also brain damage. Which brain waves are associated with deep sleep? The delta. So the spinal cord structure, remember it's got the meninges surrounding it, just the way the brain does. Now the spinal cord has an outer layer of white matter. Remember, those are myelinated axons, and an inner layer of gray matter in the shape of a butterfly. And gray matter is cell bodies and unmyelinated axons. And then a hole in the middle called the central canal, and cerebral spinal fluid flows up and down that central canal. We'll see two enlargements, one that supplies nerves to the shoulder and upper limb, and one that supplies nerves to the pelvis and lower limbs. We will see the conus medullaris, and we will see the cauda equina. So our spinal cord has 31 pairs of spinal nerves coming off of it. So you can see at C8 we have 8 cervical spinal nerves and so on. Now the spinal cord ends right there. This is the conus medullaris. That's the end of the spinal cord. And yet these the spinal nerves continue into what looks like a horse's tail, so this is called the cauda equina. Each spinal nerve is a mixed nerve in that it has both sensory and motor neurons. Incoming sensory information goes to the dorsal root, and outgoing information comes out the ventral root. So you can see these yellow. They'll always show spinal nerves in yellow. Here's our spinal nerve, which is a combo of sensory and motor. But the incoming sensory information is going to come up this dorsal root. The dorsal root ganglion are the cell bodies and enter the spinal cord, and then outgoing information comes out the ventral root. You can see the center of the spinal cord looks like a butterfly of gray matter. And it will look different depending on where you are on that spinal cord. Which of the following is found in the dorsal white column? Well, we haven't really talked about the dorsal white column, but think white column. What's going to be in the white column? Myelinated axons. Oligodendrocytes are the cells in the central nervous system that make the myelin sheath. The gray matter is in the shape of a butterfly, and there's projections called horns. We do not need to know all of this detail here. But here's that dorsal root ganglion, that's the incoming sensory information. Here's the ventral root, the outgoing motor information. Here's the central canal. Again, a little bit too much information here. We don't need to identify these parts of the spinal cord. But the columns, the white matter, contain columns going up and down. These are bundles of axons. So you can imagine incoming information is carrying sensory information up. So the ascending tracts have sensory information, and then the descending tracts are coming down with the motor commands. Spinal meninges are the same as the brain meninges. Outer layer is the dura mater, arachnoid mater is in the middle, and the pia mater will be right on the spinal cord. A spinal tap is collecting spinal fluid, and you want to do it below the cauda equina because you don't want to hit the spinal cord. Where is the spinal tap performed? Inferior to the conus medullaris, between L2 and the sacrum.